Here we're looking at a very early and very rare DeForest radiophone made in 1920. It's one of the very first commercial radiophone transmitters available and was frequently used in broadcast stations. A similar model was used at WWJ. They and KDKA both claim to be the first broadcast station. This is the exact model made by DeForest and used at WWJ in 1920 when they first went on the air. It uses a modulated oscillator. Among the more popular items in the museum is this large phonograph with a large horn. This type of phonograph was actually used in radio stations. In the early days, you did not have electrical pickup from the record. This was a mechanical phonograph with a crank to wind it up. There was no electrical way to get the music off the record, so in order to use it for radio, you placed an ordinary telephone microphone in front of the horn, wound up the motor, and put the mechanical reproducer on the record. The microphone would pick up the music from the horn and feed it into the radio transmitter. This is certainly a very crude arrangement. The little television set at the left on the lower shelf is really a 3-inch set made by Pilot in 1947. Even though the tube is only 3 inches in size, the picture looks larger because there is a magnifying glass in front of the picture tube. It was common in those days to sell a magnifying glass to put in front of the tube to make the picture look larger. Here we're looking at an extremely early television set. This was made by the Jenkins Company, and as you see, the screen on this television set is fairly good size, maybe 7 inches, but really the picture is not 7 inches at all. This is a side view of the same receiver. You see, there's a large round disc with 48 holes in it, and each hole has a magnifying glass in the hole. These holes are not in a uniform circle around the disc. They're in the form of a spiral, and the major to minor diameter of the spiral is 1 inch. Now what we do is to scan a picture with a spiral, so the size of the picture to be seen is the major minor diameter of the spiral, which is 1 inch. Light comes from the neon lamp, which is to the left, and goes through the lenses and is magnified. It then goes up and hits the mirror, which you can see at the right. The light is then reflected to the ground glass in the front of the set. So the little 1-inch picture at the spiral ends up being approximately 7 inches in size. This method is very crude since there were only 48 holes, and this gave only 48 lines to the picture, so it didn't have very much resolution and the picture was not very distinct. The modern television set has 525 lines. This is a view of another one of those spinning discs used in television. This disc is a large one with a spiral having a major-minor diameter better than 2 inches. This disc belonged to Dr. Alexanderson of General Electric Company. Here is an example of early color television. Again, they used a rotating disc with the 3 primary colors rotating in front of an ordinary black and white receiver. If you synchronize the speed of the disc through the circuit inside the set, you can obtain very nice color television. However, a mechanical color television was not practical. It was large, it was noisy, and limited in scope. Now we're looking at a showcase of very early loose couplers. Loose couplers are forms of coils used for tuning in radio stations. In the upper right, you see a vertical loose coupler made by Radio Apparatus Company. This is a very rare coupler made about 1914. One coil goes up and down by using a weight and pulley. It has many, many turns, as does the other loose coupler in the center top of the showcase. That was made by F.B. Chambers Company in Philadelphia. Note the hundreds of turns, so it could tune to several thousand meters. In those days, the thought was that the longer the wavelength used, the greater the distance covered. So they made these couplers to tune those long, long wavelengths. Immediately to the left of the big coupler, you see a little loose coupler with some tap switches. This is the Clap Eastham loose coupler made about 1915 and was the personal property of Major Armstrong. Major Armstrong used this coupler when he was a young man, and it came from his estate. This is a general view of the Armstrong room looking east. The large painting on the wall is a view of the Lawrenceville, New Jersey AT&T Transoceanic Station. From this station, they had telephone circuits all over the world. The painting was made in 1928 when the station was built, and it shows some of the famous Sturba array beam antennas. This is a telegraphone. It's the first commercially made wire recorder of about 1908 or 1910, and was invented by Polson of the Polson Arc fame. The recorder uses no tubes, but operates with induction coils, and one talks into a diaphragm like the early telephones. It was marketed to compete with Edison's dictaphone, which used the wax cylinder. Of course, it's the forerunner of the modern wire and tape recorders. Here we're looking at the magnetic detector in the showcase, which we mentioned several pictures back. This was one of the first practical detectors used in commercial operation. At the far left, you can see a handle. This would wind a clockwork motor, which would keep the iron wire belt moving. This detector worked somewhat on the principle of the iron wire recorder, magnetizing and demagnetizing the wire. You can see the magnets hanging down. This is a very rare piece of equipment and was used by the Marconi Company as a detector for many years. This showcase is one full of early crystal sets. Most of them were made before World War I, though some are post-war. There are DeForest crystal sets, Colby tuners, and other early crystal sets. One is a Radiola 1, which is very rare crystal set of 1921. Next is a wireless specially apparatus radiola, which is extremely rare and is highly prized by the collector today. All crystal sets of this period are, I might add. This is our solid-state display. We show the progress made in the development of present-day state-of-the-art, and we start with a simple crystal detector in the upper left. Then we see a diode, half-wave rectifiers, which are solid-state. Then we see the first transistor type, and you can see the point contact, early transistors developed by Western Electric and General Electric. Then you see other transistors. There are chips, integrated circuits, and in the lower right is the ultimate, with the combination of chips and printed circuits, which literally have thousands of transistors and diodes in a very, very small area. This is our latest display case, where you see both television receiving tubes and transmitting tubes used in the cameras. In the lower part are pre-war television picture tubes and early cathode ray tubes. On the top shelf are the early camera tubes. These were all obtained from the RCA Research Laboratory, where the tubes were developed by Vladimir Zworykin. First, there is his earliest tube, which is 40 to 45 years old, the original iconoscope. You see the iconoscope, the image iconoscope, the orthicon, the isocon, the image orthicon, and at the far right, the modern television tubes like the Vidicon and Plumicon. There's one tube, however, that was not developed by RCA. It's the Farnsworth dissector tube, which is also a very early tube contemporary with the iconoscope developed by Zworykin. It is a very, very, very rare tube. You are looking at what you might say is the ultimate in the tuned radio frequency receiver. This set was made about 1928, and it used the first screen grid tubes. This came as a kit and was known as the Sergeant Raymond. It uses 4 states of tuned RF and a detector, a tuned detector. This was the ultimate in tuned RF sets before the AC and superhets became popular. This display of early headsets is on the 3rd floor of our museum. There are 51 different pairs of headphones here. All of these headsets were made before 1930, and many of them are dated before World War I. We sincerely hope you've enjoyed our little trip through the Antique Wireless Association Museum. Please accept our cordial invitation to visit our museum in East Bloomfield whenever you are in the Rochester, New York area.